Muchísimas gracias. Um, I thought I'd begin by telling you how this book came about. I'm on a train from Valencia to Barcelona just a few years ago. And it turns out that the woman who is sitting next to me is not only a professor at the University of Valencia, but she's the head of their press. And she said, I understand you once with the embassy. I said, yeah. And I started to tell her some stories. And she said, would you write that book for us? I said, sure. It was the fastest contract I ever got in my life. Um, and I'll pass it around, that's this copy of the book, the Spanish version. And I'll also pass around the American version. Um, they're, they are somewhat different. By the way, my publisher is John Hansen, who's right here, and his wife Jody, who's somewhere out there. Uh, and uh, Here in the United States. Uh, and they do wonderful things. They do wonderful creative publishing, especially in a world where nobody reads anymore, or very few do, but you do. So I'm glad you're here tonight. Um, so after it came out in Spain, in Spanish, University of Valencia, then now it's just come out October 1st here in the States. And I changed a bunch of stuff. Uh, a lot of the stuff I changed was John's idea. He said, and he was absolutely right. He said, this chapter here, I don't think anybody's going to understand it. And he also made some wonderful suggestions. And so so we took a chapter out, and instead I put in an afterword, what it was like to get out of the diplomatic service and go to Rutgers University, where I've been ever since as a professor, in the very late 60s, early 70s. When I went there in 69, and I'm still there. And I was supposed to go to Vietnam as the U.S. cultural attaché in Vietnam from Spain. And by this time, I thought the war was a stupid idea. And also, I had 3 little children, and I wasn't going to abandon them for a war I didn't believe in. So I left the diplomatic service. But the 4 years before that were the years in Spain. There's probably 2 stories I want to focus on this evening. One is about the day I spent alone with Martin Luther King in Madrid, of all places. And the other one is about one of the really terrible events of the Cold War, which is when the United States ended up dropping 4 hydrogen bombs on Spain, luckily unarmed and not on purpose. And I'll tell you that story later. Two very different stories. The King story is a soft story, and the bomb story is the hard story. But before I do that, I thought I'd tell you about a few of the other chapters in the book. And by the way, I brought along a bunch of copies, and if any of you want one, I'll write anything you like in there. Because I'm always looking for readers. That's why you write books. This is my 13th book. I write fiction, nonfiction, journalism. I go back and forth. I never wanted to make up my mind who I wanted to be when I grew up, and never have. So I go back and forth between different literary forms. One of the chapters, a couple of chapters in the book that I might mention, and then I'll get on to the Martin Luther King story. One of the chapters is about the making of the movie Dr. Zhivago. My son, who was then 4.5, is the little boy in the movie, Sasha, if you've ever seen Dr. Zhivago. Omar Sharif's his father, Gerald Lee Chaplin's his mother. And there's a picture in the book in that chapter as it's coming around, both in the Spanish edition and the American edition, about how that came about. It was a very strange and wonderful experience. And there's another chapter in there on what it was like to be a Jew in Spain in those days when, uh, given the concordat between Franco and the Vatican, uh, which made every other religion illegal. Um, uh, I begin that chapter with a funny story, really. It's funny, it's not funny. I'm in a bar up in northern Spain, in Asturias, and the guys in the bar are trying to teach me how to pour the wonderful cider, the hard cider of Asturias, which perhaps you know it. You know, and you hold it, yeah, right, you hold the bottle this way over your head, and you have the glass with a very big open glass pointing out this way, and the cider is supposed to come down, hit the outside of the glass, and bounce in. And I'm trying to do that, but of course, most of it's running down my pants or all over the floor. A little bit is going into the into the glass. And one of the guys says to me, and we're all pretty well drunk by this time, and one of the guys says to me, "Are you Catholic or atheist?" Those seemed to be the only possibilities. So I said, "No, no, I'm not. I'm neither a Catholic nor an atheist." He said, "No kidding." "Well, then you must be Protestant." I said, "Why would you think that?" "Well, because everybody in the American government is Protestant." I said, "Well, no, that's not true either." And John Kennedy wasn't Protestant. Uh, um, so I said, "Well, what are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Jewish." And he said, "No, no, you couldn't be Jewish." "Oh, well, why couldn't I be Jewish?" He said, "Because you don't have any horns." I said, well, so I joked. I said, "Well, I had them cut off when I came into the Foreign Service." But I said it jokingly. He took it seriously. And there's a picture in the book, which again is in the American book, thanks to John, not in the Spanish book, of Michelangelo's Moses, where he shows Moses with horns. And it's a mistranslation of the Bible where it says horns of light came down on Moses from heaven, but the mistranslation made it horns. And so Michelangelo gave Moses horns, and that's where the story apparently came from. These guys thinking I had horns. Where were my horns? If I didn't have horns, I couldn't possibly be Jewish. There's a chapter in there called Lost in Translation, which I like a lot because I look at what's obscene in the United States in language and what's obscene in Spanish. They're very different things. There are things that are said in Spain every day, which if I were to say them in the United States, I'd be beaten to death by all the women from 50 miles around. And Spaniards say it every other word. And then there are things just the other way around that we say that Spaniards would never say. And you get a real sense and feeling for how the language is such an index to culture. And also, I think what it should teach all of us is that when you translate, you have to know not just both languages, but both cultures. You really do. I've translated one book from Spanish into English, and I really had to know Argentina for the book, and I really had to know, because I was with our embassy in Argentina before I went to Spain. I really had to know Argentina. I had to have a sense and a feeling for 19th century Argentina, no less, to do that. You know, there's an expression in Spanish, traducción de vaca, which means literal translation. I mean, so you know, there's a perfect example. If you saw traducción de vaca, cow translation, you wouldn't say cow translation in English. It wouldn't mean anything. You would say literal translation. That's a perfect example of how you have to know both cultures in order to do that kind of thing. One other vignette from one of the stories. The first story is called "How I Managed Not to Shake Hands with Francisco Franco." In those days, Spain had lots of fascists around, not just the government, but this was